Chapters 5 and 6. My parents' new home. My parents' new house that they bought after I graduated from college was a big old Victorian with 12 rooms and high ceilings. The front porch wrapped around the house and was filled with white wicker sofas and chairs my mother salvaged from the barn and slicked up with coats and coats of white paint. The old house itself had been a part of John Brown's Underground Railway during the Civil War. Caves had been carved out of the dirt basement during that period to hide runaway slaves coming through to points north and, hopefully, to safety. Resting like battered old soldiers at attention along the sagging shelves were the many wooden boxes of empty medicine bottles used to treat the slaves that sought haven in the basement hiding places. Several small cots, rusting away quietly, hand-woven cloth now hanging loosely from the frames, rotting from age and dampness, were still where they were placed a century ago, against the far opening in one of the caves. Busy spiders had taken up residence spinning webs between the feeble legs of the beds, indicating a level of undisturbed life that was still going on down there. Mother and Daddy somehow did not feel the need to remove any of this from its hiding place. My father was born south of the Mason-Dixon and was cared for by a free woman named Minerva. She, along with her daughter Rosie, were considered family, and my father never lost his love for his old mammy, even after she and Rosie died. I always reasoned that my father, by keeping the cellar intact the way it had been during the times Minerva's people were fleeing for their lives, he was, in his simple way, honoring her memory and her people and their struggle to be free. Hopedale also was the home of a young Clark Gable, the famous movie star. As a young boy, he would visit the children who lived in my parents' house, and honestly, there is a picture verifying that fact in the Clark Gable Museum, a small white salt box building on Highway 22 nearby. Hanging on the wall in that museum is a picture of Clark as a young teen, sitting on the railing of our big porch. Chapter 6. Pop goes the weasel, and the jack-in-the-box jumps out of his house, and that means it's time for the Romper Room School. And this is Miss Sandra saying hello to all the boys and girls here, and to all our friends at home. I remembered a conversation I had with Sherry Lewis, the creator of the children's show, starring her hand puppet Lamb Chop, several months before I had actually auditioned for Romper Room. We were both performing, I was singing, at a March of Dimes telethon in Pittsburgh, and during our time off camera, we talked about her work with children, how fulfilling it was for her. Well, since I also enjoy children, I thought it was something that I too might be able to do someday. I never thought the opportunity to try would soon fall in my lap. 6 months after my conversation with Sherry, I was auditioning for Romper Room. Each of the hopefuls at the audition was called into the television studio, one by one, for an interview with the program's syndication representatives. From that, a final cut was made to decide which of us actually would get to the audition. From those finalists, the winner would be hired to host the show. Although I was nervous, my interview must have gone well as I made the final cut. There were about 250 women there auditioning. When my turn came to enter the studio, I was asked to make up a show, to pull it right from the top of my head on the spot. This performance was to include singing, talking to imaginary children, and doing several commercials. I thought of my lunches in Bryant Park and the imaginary plays I would perform in my head while watching the characters there. I knew I could sing, especially since I'd sung and played Peter, Paul, and Mary on the guitar at least 1,000 times. It's the only song that I ever could play in my whole life. But the confidence boost I got from my initial interview and my capabilities in the other areas quickly sank to zero when they asked me to saddle up on a bright orange pogo stick, a little thing made for 4-year-olds. In high heels and a tight miniskirt, I galloped around the studio like an idiot. How could I ever have considered making a fool of myself like this? And why on earth could I ever have let my mother convince me that I would be perfect for this job? I will never, never know. I always knew you could do it, she said. Thanks to my mother's unending faith in me, my first job after college was on Romper Room, and this stroke of good fortune changed my life forever. Before I was allowed to go on the air, the Claster family put into their training classes in Baltimore with their daughter Sally, who had taken over for her mother Nancy as my teacher. Now, Nancy was the original Romper Room teacher, and when she retired, her daughter inherited her mother's position. Sally, a stylishly slender young woman with short dark hair, was an excellent teacher and put me through the paces of a real-life show during the week I was in training. One session was held in her home, and at one point, I was comfortably seated in her living room couch that had the most interesting black and white tweed fabric. While trying to score some brownie points, I let her know just how much I loved her tweed fabric. Her face showed a slight wonderment at my remark. Well, it wasn't until later, when her 2 lively Dalmatian dogs bounded into the room to jump on our laps, that I realized that her solid black upholstered couch was filled with needle-sharp hairs from her dogs that had creatively woven themselves into the fabric of her lovely couch, thus tweed. From that time on, I carefully kept my opinions to myself. Although I went to my first live telecast feeling fully ready, nothing in my wildest dreams prepared me for the moment when the floor assistant began the countdown to airtime. I began to hyperventilate, and I thought, how stupid I was for wearing a bow blouse, because the bow, having been activated in an interesting jumpity-jump movement by my racing heart, it was sporadically bouncing against my cheek. My legs felt like rubber, and my knees never regained consciousness as I woodenly went through my paces on the set. If there had been a man with a big hook on my side, like I'd seen in the Three Stooges comedies, oh, I would have been ever so grateful to have been pulled off so I could run away. Unfortunately, no such luck. After the show was finally over, I don't know what I did to deserve such grace, but somehow, some kind of divine intervention must have been at work on my behalf. I got through the show without fainting or having my knees buckle. And most of all, I didn't get fired. As Miss Sandra, I went to the television station at 8, and after a little pre-air preparation, went on the air at 9. In an hour, I was finished and back at my desk, reviewing my mail, and I only interviewed prospective students once a week. So, on most days by noon, I was heading back home. My young dreams to be on the screen as an actor, through this show, realized a small corner of my ambitions. I felt fortunate that my new life was working out so well. Romper Room scripts arrived in my mail at the station on a weekly basis from headquarters in Baltimore. I was warned ahead of time by Miss Sally that I was not allowed to deviate 1 inch from the script unless it said so. I had to follow to the letter the program script week by week, or really risk getting fired. As an example, I was told that one Romper Room teacher before me took it upon herself to include the children's song, Itsy Bitsy Spider Climbing Up the Spout. You know that one. Well, it's often sung ditty by most little children. Well, her decision to divert from the original script made Itsy Bitsy Spider Climbing Up the Spout not only her downfall, but also her swan song on Romper Room. She was fired for not sticking to the script. So on those many occasions when the scripts repeated themselves, and I was so tempted to add some of my own creativity beyond the natural interplay with my students, I had to hold back in fear of being terminated. All in all, the Romper Room years were good ones for me in several ways. First, I loved getting up and going to work. I liked working with children, and I enjoyed each group of doobies as they came, then graduated after 2 weeks to make room for the next class. Secondly, the hours and hours of television experience, live television, was a perfect training ground which would eventually enable me to move on to something else in television after I got tired of Romper Room. Because year after year the scripts often repeated themselves, I knew I would eventually crave more of a challenge at work. What or when that next step for me would be, I wasn't sure. But I realized that I was preparing. Months into Romper Room, I suspected that my director had a crush on me. He would be extremely attentive outside the call of duty and once bought me a beautiful leather briefcase with my initials on it. He would make slight sexual innuendos to me, not so strong that they were offensive, but strong enough that I understood his intention. A director and performer, especially when live television is involved, we depended upon one another. I liked and respected him personally, but the attraction he had for me was not what I wanted, and mine for him was merely on a professional level. Most importantly, he was married, and that was a definite no in my book. My office at the station was next to the news department, and sometimes after my administrative work was done, I would pop my head into the newsroom now and then to read the AP Wire or to make small talk with the writers and anchormen. I also knew, because I was a woman and they enjoyed a woman popping in so that they could flirt with me, that none of them took me seriously. I was fluff at that. At best, might work out as a weather girl if I ever tired of Romper Room. How hard could it be to read the wires or call up the National Weather Bureau for current information on a local weather? Well, even a woman could do that, was their unified and unspoken attitude toward anyone of my gender. After all, it was the late 60s and early 70s. I had been on Romper Room for about a year, my work really being the center of my life, until quite by chance I met someone. It was a week before Christmas, and the light snow had been dusting all day, so by evening when I left the house to meet friends at the Pittsburgh Press Club holiday party, a glittering layer of white had already cloaked the city landscape. As I drove from the suburbs through the tunnel and out onto the Golden Triangle, my tires scrunched and squeaked as they rolled through the unplowed streets to my destination. By the time I parked my car in the municipal garage and walked a block to the party, the powdery snow covered my hair and coat shoulders. Well, having unfashionably naturally curly hair in a fashionably straight world was a curse. I thought as I made an attempt to brush the wetness from my hair with my gloves. I had taken such pains preparing for this rare evening out, rolling my hair in curlers the size of fresh orange juice cans to force my unwilling locks to go against their nature. It had all been for nothing. Now, don't waste your time trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, young lady. Your curly locks you got from me, and they have suited me just fine, my grandma used to say as she pulled and tugged at my golden mass of kink, taming the wildness on top of my hair into thick braids tied with rubber bands at the end. Much better her fussing with my hair than my mother, who would make the plaits so tight my scalp would hurt for days. Well, Grandma, I said underneath my curly head that I could almost hear squeaking as it dried, getting higher and wider by the time I handed my coat to the attendant. This is 1990-85, it's now, and curly hair just sucks. I avoided all mirrors on the way to the ballroom to escape the Frankenstein's bride hairdo suspended above my Betty Davis eyes and new black sheath cocktail dress image. I joined my friends at their table, and they discreetly avoided staring at my mile-high wild head. "Oh, what a lovely dress. It's great for your figure." And I thought, aren't good friends grand? Unconditional acceptance. Just like my dog that I had when I was a child, who loved me just because I am. I ordered a Coke, tried to forget about my hair, and made an effort to focus on the animated conversation at our table. Suddenly, my attention was diverted, and my eyes caught a figure moving toward our table. As he came nearer and moved into the light, the same feeling of passion came over me that I had when I first watched Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart in their famous love scene in Casablanca. In my voluminous head, violins began playing and fog rose above his feet as he glided our way. Before me stood the most handsome man I had ever seen in my life, tall with dark wavy hair that was thick and spilled tiny curls softly across his forehead. His ruddy complexion wore a slight hint of a 5 o'clock shadow, and his cheekbones were high and strong as though constructed to contain the inferno within his green eyes. Aware that I was gaping him, our eyes connected, and I felt a warm tingling inside. I and my mile-high hairdo were in love. The same grandma that shamed me for hating my curly hair also imparted other words of wisdom that made me want to stick my fingers in my ears that were always exposed, I might add, due to my braids she was so pleased with. Grandma would tell me when I was out of sorts that, "Sandra, out of bad things always comes something good, if you're smart enough to look for it." I never believed her. Until now. In spite of my bad hair day, Jennings asked me for a date after New Year's Eve, then another, and another, and then asked me to share his life forever. I couldn't believe that I just happened into this man who walked into my life, a man who women forever would watch with lust in their eyes as he walked through a room. This man wanted to walk with me till death do us part. And with my acceptance of that choice, in the end, I got the treasured surprise at the bottom of the Cracker Jack box. My philosophy about life is that it comprises constant choices, and the ebbs and flows in our lives, The highs and lows, by all accounts, are controlled by those choices. As my father so often reminded me, I wore my heart on my sleeve, and in hindsight, most of my choices in my life have had emotional, not logical roots. And perhaps it's a weakness that I'll carry to my grave, if it can be qualified as a weakness, because I'm not too sure I've gotten it right yet, if there is such a thing as right. I had always planned to be one of those grown-up people who made the right decisions, went to the right schools, got the right grades, married the right man, had the right amount of healthy, brilliant children, said all the right things, had the right friends, and inherited the right to always be almost right. And I may be right when I wonder if it's too late to happen to me. Too late to finally get it right. When I posed this question to myself before I married Jennings, I replied to myself with great hope for our future together. As long as we're still breathing and choosing, there's hope for all of us to get it right sometime in our lives. Another bride, another groom, another beginning for me. I had married my prince, and the emotionally empty life turned into a fairy tale. Jennings and I were married at a private ceremony with his sister and brother-in-law standing as witness for us. It didn't matter to me what kind of service we had. All I knew that I was madly in love and wanted to spend the rest of my life with Jennings. I wanted to share his pajamas, his days, have his children, and grow old with him. I felt I was one of the few who had so many things to be thankful for in my life. Even though I was the teacher on Romper Room, in a way, I grew up too while doing the show. I never experienced the depth of my feelings for children until I first became a mother, then Miss Sandra on the show. It's from those years working with the children on Romper Room that I began to realize the purity and strength of a child's unconditional love, and what a special gift that is. Each student that walked on the set became special to me. I valued each of their letters, hugs, and pictures, primary colored works truly created in an effort to express love for their teacher.
Maybe have a way with people, but your old man has yet to find. Please stay as gentle and kind. Oh, none of us can wait to get to know you better, to see who lives behind.